Oh, now we can never repeat that.
No, I know. It's never going to be as good. We just did a perfect intro, and now it's completely wasted because I hadn't pressed record
I
yet.
know.
What a dumbass.
I was so excited about my Nut server.
Look, we'll talk about your Nut server at the end of the episode where it belongs,
You're gonna make
sir.
people wait.
Yeah.
You got to build up the tension. A Nut server is all about tension and release. I can tell you that. So,
look, the dick jokes happen on my on the stream, Brad, and at giantbomb.com. This is nothing but testicle jokes from here on out. That's what we do here. Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad.
This is the #1 podcast where people talk about a single topic each week.
What's our topic? Will?
NAS. Network Attached Storage.
That sounds nasty.
Need another soda. No one.
You'll need plenty of sodas as you bang away on your NAS trying to get stuff to work.
Look,
caffeine is
never always SSH.
Yes.
Nothing seems simple.
I think we're getting a little afield of the topic here.
But yeah, so you and I have both, a few years ago, you sent me one of those messages that started a really, really long thread that went for probably a year.
Yeah.
You're like, hey, you run a free NAS server, right?
Yes.
Question mark.
Uh-huh.
It's like, oh, do I?
Yeah.
I did maybe an article about this that tested years ago. But yeah, I've been running a free NAS server for like probably 6 or 7 years now. It's probably,
wow.
Yeah.
Jeez, you've been in there for a good long while.
I've been in through some major changes.
Yeah, I guess so. I'm coming up on 2 years here, but I feel like at some point, NAS was a term that I heard about, 10 years ago or something, and I assumed it was just something in the enterprise world that I would never care about.
Well,
but then I feel like it's a topic that has started breaching the mainstream and the consumer level a lot more than I would have expected in the last year or two.
So there's two things. There's two ways to look at, servers have existed for years.
Yeah, of course.
On small business. One of my first jobs was building servers for small businesses, so they'd have a shared place to dump files before, in the world before Dropbox or Google Drive or whatever. But now we're in a little bit of a different space, and it turns out that a lot of us have big media collections. Like if you have a kid, you probably shoot 15 or 20,000 photos a year with your phone. Those have to be stored someplace, and as we move more mobile, it's been nice to move some of that big storage off of laptop hard drives that are usually too small and into a shared, all a network attached storage is at base is a hard drive that's connected to the network in your house.
It's just a storage volume on your network instead of hooked up to a PC.
And they can range anywhere from a fully fledged PC server to a Windows machine that just has a bunch of hard drives in it, to a dedicated NAS box from a company like Synology, all the way down to Western Digital sells hard drives that you can hook up to Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I forgot until we were about to start this. You reminded me that, you literally can buy what is essentially just a hard drive that can connect to and that is technically a NAS. Yeah,
it just looks like an external USB hard drive. Right. And usually they even have USB ports. So if you want to copy the stuff over the first time fast, you can. And then they hook up to Wi-Fi.
Right.
So there's a lot of. I feel like that's the definition, right? It's literally just a bucket on your network that you can source. Sometimes they're connected to the internet. Sometimes they're not. That's a choice you can make. Sometimes
I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
I guess it really is just driven by the amount of media that the average person is, or not media, but data.
Well, yeah, and
it's just piling up, right? It goes even beyond photos and kind of personal stuff. We back up our iPhones and put those on because an iPhone backup can get pretty big these days. We put those on the NAS because that's a large amount of data.
Really, you do?
There's a little bit of a hoarding aspect there.
Oh, see, I
just trying to play it safe.
I pay the 50 cents a month or whatever for iCloud to back up.
Yeah.
It's the only thing I use iCloud for is for
I've
iOS
got
backups.
weird situations where I've got an old iPhone backup that's got text messages with, let's say, someone who's no longer with us.
Oh, yeah,
I don't want to lose that.
Yeah. Necessarily. You can pull those out. There's a tool.
Yeah, there are tools to export SMS or iMessage conversations and stuff like that.
But yeah, so that stuff exists. That stuff is all out there. Having a dedicated place to back up all of your local computers really, really nice.
Yeah.
Having a place to store your photos, having just a machine that's always on that can run stuff that makes your photos always accessible, or that lets you do weird home automation hacks, like make things that aren't, compatible with Siri or Apple HomeKit. Thank you. Home something, whatever. Apple's home business.
Yeah.
Work with Apple's home business. And there's benefits to all that, and there's different levels of capability at the different kind of levels of complexity on the server.
Yeah. Plex is probably the actual most common use case, I would say.
I call mine Smithflix because it's like Netflix, but for Smiths.
You do. It's true.
Yeah. And so Plex is a piece of software that lets you share movies and TV shows that you've presumably ripped, but I guess also potentially stolen
sure.
Within your home, or also with people outside your house if you have fast enough internet.
Yeah.
And it is fantastic. In the days before Netflix and Disney Plus and Hulu let you copy things onto a device to watch when you're offline, like for example, if you're taking a small child on an airplane ride, Plex was incredible.
Yeah.
Like 6 years ago when my daughter was new, and we would go on 5 years ago when she was 2, and we were going on an airplane ride, and I could just copy Totoro and Little Mermaid and whatever else she wanted to, Winnie the Pooh, onto an iPad and give that to her, so she'd just zone out in front of a TV for 3 hours on the airplane.
Sure.
Terrific.
Yeah. And this is just anecdotal, but having read through dozens, if not hundreds of conversations on the internet over the last few years about NASs, Plex is far and away the most cited example of things that people want to do with their NAS.
Plex and local backup are the two things that I did before anything else.
Yes. I guess we should kind of start at the bottom in terms of like what devices are available.
Yeah.
Like my path to wanting a NAS was that I've never had more than 2 terabytes of storage in my Windows machine. I had like a single 2 terabyte hard drive. It started what? Like I just didn't need that much, really.
You can get a 6 terabyte drive for like 75 cents.
I bought that like 8 years ago or something. Okay. I had one 2 terabyte drive that started throwing smart errors.
Well, that's just throw it in the trash.
Yeah, I mean, it's still going.
Throw it in the trash.
It never actually died. It still works.
God, Brad.
Technically.
Oh.
But like I only had one 2 terabyte hard drive and like a small SSD that I could install a few games on, right?
Yeah.
And so at a certain point, I saw that drive was starting to error out. And I was like, well, I guess it's time to buy another hard drive. Like, what's big now? What can I get? A 4 terabyte, a 6? What's going on?
You just went back for another 2.
No, I didn't.
Okay.
That's when I stopped.
Okay.
That's when I stopped and took stock of like, okay, do I really want to go buy another hard drive and throw it in this PC and then toss out this 2 terabyte one when it dies?
No.
Or should I like step up and like make something that's kind of a cool central repository for everything?
Yeah.
And throw it on the network. And that's when I started looking into getting the NAS. But I actually spent the first few months pretty convinced I was going to get a Synology. Because they're by far, and I've never bought one. I've never actually used one. But from what I can tell, like by far the most like turnkey off the shelf solution.
And that's the benefit is you get it's I think they're usually like Intel Atom processors or something.
And that's what ultimately stopped me, but we'll get to that.
So they're a little lower power, but they're relatively inexpensive, and it's basically like a box with a little CPU and a little bit of memory that you can jam a whole boatload of hard drives into.
It looks like a little hard drive cave.
Yeah.
Like if you look at a picture of one, it's like a black box with a big gaping front where a bunch of hard drives can plug in.
Yeah. It's one of those things that so when I started down this path, the choices were basically I wanted a Plex server because I have a bunch of Blu-rays and DVDs and stuff
like that. And this is slightly legally ambiguous territory, but like a place to dump ROMs.
Yeah.
Also,
yeah.
Because solutions for running old games are getting pretty cool these days,
You can like a Mister is
like the Mister is the prototypical example, but even the Raspberry Pis will do a lot of cool stuff,
We got to do a Mister episode at some point.
should. Well, I need to buy one. I need to actually start fiddling with one. But point being, there are a lot of cool and particularly a lot of embedded solutions for stuff like that now.
Yeah.
And I wanted something where like, okay, I can just keep one collection of everything, one collection of like my movies, my music, like ROMs, whatever. And then any device I get down the line, like if I build a Mister, if I want to get a Raspberry Pi 4 at some point, just having that one SMB share on the network, and I can always just point whatever device I'm tinkering with at that same share at any time and not have to worry about like, oh, I'm going to copy 500 gig of files over to this SD card or whatever it is. You know what I mean?
Well, that seems exactly right. And having that stuff all in one place makes it easier to back up.
Yeah.
It also makes it a little bit more challenging to back up. We need to remember to talk about backups at the end here. Okay, so the NAS is a place to dump a bunch of files, and then maybe run some stuff on top that gives you access to them in interesting ways.
Yeah. And so like running stuff on top is where that's where the record scratch happened when I was looking at the Synology stuff.
Well, so in the 2 years since you built your NAS, that world has changed a little bit.
I bet they have been getting better.
Yeah, the low-end processors have gotten more capable. The software has gotten better at using the hardware extensions built into the CPUs to do like video like 2 years ago, a NAS wouldn't have been able to do video transcode, and now it probably can if you set it up right.
I think when I was first looking at them a couple of years ago, they were just barely had that capability. But like you said, they were all. I think they were mostly Intel Atom based. I think there were some of the low end ones were even ARM based.
Yeah,
like not a lot of horsepower there.
Yeah, it's you don't have the muscle. So I went the other way when I did mine and just turned my old gaming PC into a NAS box, which is the least efficient way in terms of power of electricity use, but is super easy. And there's some trade-offs to that. But and I went with FreeNAS because it was kind of what was available. It was either that or run a Linux machine
and do everything yourself.
And not the benefit at the time of FreeNAS was that it supported a file system called ZFS.
Yeah.
And what ZFS does is lets you basically put a whole bunch of drives in a pool, and as long as they're more or less the same size, you can do redundancy and stuff like that.
It does a lot of stuff. I mean, it's from the enterprise world. It was conceived for servers a couple decades ago or something.
It's been around for a long time.
Like pretty much anybody who knows their shit about storage will tell you that ZFS is the best file system on the planet.
It's a modern file system in a way that NTFS and EXTFS kind of are not anymore.
Right. Like it supports RAID at the file system level or at the command line level. It's got checksumming built into it for, error correction and detection. It's got a lot of redundancy features. It's got native snapshotting, so you can have multiple versions of a drive that
like shadow volumes is what Windows calls that, but it works way better.
Right. Like all that stuff is built in at the base level.
Well, and more importantly, when it fails, you can replace a drive and it'll resliver out the like the data that was spread that was on that drive back from the other drives over a period of hours. Right. So it's designed to be seamless. It's a kind of overkill for home use.
Kind of, yeah.
But if you're talking about ripping a collection of like 1,000 Blu-rays and DVDs, it was at the time when like 4 terabyte hard drives were huge and $500.
Yeah.
It was the only way to keep that many movies on one volume. And the thing about the server is it turns out you don't really need to keep that many volume videos on one volume, just because of the way the Plex server works. Like Plex can combine multiple physical storage locations into one library seamlessly, but it wasn't the case back then. So, and one of the things we got the reason we're doing this episode is when we did the questions episode a couple weeks ago, we got like 6 or a significant percentage of the overall questions we received were about NAS.
We got just enough NAS questions that I was like, we should save these and just do a NAS episode probably. So I think like the most basic question was basically, hey, I want a NAS. Should I get something like a Synology or a QNAP, like one of those embedded boxes, or should I build a machine and put like a NAS oriented OS on it? And
honestly, where we are now, it's nice to have my own collections. I like that a lot. But the ability to like save stuff on an iPad or phone from Netflix and Hulu and Amazon and Disney Plus and all of those over the top services is like 90% of why I started with the Plex server.
Like I've had a lot of fun doing a lot of different stuff with mine that I hadn't expected to do in the first place, but it's been interesting to see a lot of people actually go the complete opposite direction with this stuff
and just completely eschew any collection at all.
Try to like banish local storage from their lives entirely and just go cloud everything.
And I think that's totally doable.
That is absolutely, even like 2 years later after I built all this stuff, is like kind of a valid option. Even if you want compute, you can spin up AWS.
You can run Plex on AWS.
Yeah, like you can run
on EC2.
You can run cloud compute nodes to do some of the stuff you would like to do in your house.
So it's expensive.
Yeah, it's not. Yes,
you're looking at like minimum probably of $20 a month for AWS if you have a small collection.
Right.
But yeah, it is totally doable.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I think you have to think about what your use cases are. If you just want to back up a bunch of machines locally, and you're talking about like laptops that have 256 gig SSDs in them, you should be able to. You want to think about the amount of data space you need for backups as enough to keep 3 days, 3 weeks, and 1 month, or maybe 3 months, up to 3 months of storage. So what that means is you keep, if it's January, that means you'll have a monthly backup from, you'll have daily backups for the last 3 to 5 days, right? So it's Saturday. You'll have a checkup on Friday, Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday that are all diffs. Just the differential backup, just the stuff that's changed on the hard drive from the Sunday backup,
right?
And then you'll keep 3 Sundays, right? So you'll keep the current Sunday a week ago, Sunday a week before that, and then you'll keep the first Sunday of the month for the 3 preceding months as well.
Like it's basically the macOS time machine model, right?
Exactly.
It's just like you've got by date sort of previous iterations of your storage volume.
Well, but time machine goes constantly. It's continuous.
Right, that's sure.
It never stops.
Yeah, but I mean, when you browse it, they break it out by date.
Yeah. But the upshot is, and the reason this is a good time to talk about this, I talk about this a lot, I feel like, but the difference between redundancy and backup. Redundancy is when we talk about RAID, which is a redundant array of inexpensive disks. And what that means is if one drive fails, the machine doesn't go down.
Yeah.
Right.
And you don't lose any data.
You don't lose any data. There's a bunch of different ways to do that. RAID and redundant disks like ZFS don't save you from things like viral attacks, like virus attacks, malware that locks you out of your computer, things like that. Backups can actually do that.
Yeah.
So you like having a RAID array in a NAS box does not replace backing up that NAS box.
Right.
Which is, for the love of God, back up your hard drives, back up your business. Because for example, if you realize today that you deleted something 2 weeks ago that you really, really need, then you can actually go back into the backup, find the file you need, and it's there.
Yeah.
The RAID, ZFS might have it.
Yeah.
Most systems won't. A hardware RAID won't. And back your stuff up. That's the TLDR. Yeah. One of the neat things about using a NAS box is often you can pay, rather than paying for like a cloud backup provider for all of the computers in your house, you can just back up the storage volume on the NAS box and you don't have to pay anybody else, which is nice.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, I think if you're trying to decide like, hey, I want storage on my network, should I go whole hog or should I just get one of these integrated solutions? Like, basically ask yourself, do I just want storage on the network? Like, do I just want a place to put files,
store photos and music? And
if the answer is yes, like something like a Synology is totally adequate.
Yeah. Or if you're just doing backups and you have a bunch of laptops buy like an 8 terabyte USB hard drive that connects to the network and let it rip.
I mean, there are even like routers that you can plug USB hard drives into that can essentially perform the same function. So
I mean, they're going to be real light, but it gives you a place to store back.
Right.
So the benefit of going with a more powerful machine, including, and Synology fits into this category, is that you'll actually be able to saturate your network connection with even a low powered dedicated NAS versus one of the like an external hard drive that has network connection.
Sure.
And definitely compared to any Wi-Fi device.
Yeah. But so the thing that stopped me when I was looking at the Synologies, and like I feel like the sweet spot is probably like a 4 bay. Like
probably,
that's something you could plug 4 hard drives into, and that gives you some redundancy because you want at least, basically, like when we're talking about redundancy, what you're going to be looking at in practical terms is losing at least 1 disk's worth of storage. So
yeah. So
if you plug in 4 drives and you have one drive's worth of redundancy, that means you can lose one of those drives.
Yeah.
And not lose any data. But that also means that the total amount of usable storage is number of drives minus 1.
So for example, if you have 4 terabyte drives and you plug in 4 terabyte drives and you set them up to be redundant, then you'll have 12 terabytes of storage versus 16 terabytes of storage.
Yeah. Or if you there are a lot of people that will tell you that you should have no less than two drives worth of redundancy, which means that you would only have 8 terabytes of usable space out of 16 total.
So
that means you can lose 2 drives and still not lose anything.
But this is and with FreeNAS, the software that runs on the Synology boxes and the software that we're both running, we'll talk about different software in a sec. You can choose how much redundancy you want when you set up the drive array.
It's just a question of how much storage you're willing to lose.
So
in the process,
I'm about to say something controversial.
Oh no!
If you have a good backup scheme, I think having a good backup scheme, then that means having something that you run and that you test and you can restore. That works.
You mean like a secondary backup?
I mean, just a backup.
Yeah.
I mean, a backup for the server.
A backup of the NAS.
Yeah, backup of the NAS.
A backup of your backup.
I mean, yeah.
Yes.
Backup,
trust me, I get it.
Yeah, backup. Dog, back up your backup. If you like backups, you can back up while you're backing up. if you have a good backup scheme, that's more important than having redundancy.
Yeah, I agree with that. Sure.
I think redundancy for home use, like if you're in an office environment, if you're like, and the weird thing about FreeNAS specifically is people use it for like small work group servers all the time.
Small business.
People use it for big work group servers, like 50 and 100 person work groups. And then people also use it to like play pirated movies on their Plex machine in their house.
Right.
So it's like it's a real wide range of use cases.
It's a broad spectrum NAS solution.
Yeah. And if you're the dude that's like pirating a shitload of movies, probably don't bother backing that up because they're just going to pirate them again when the hard drives bomb out.
Right. But again, if you've got like I said, if you've got stuff that's like personally important to you on there and hard to replace or irreplaceable.
Yeah. Redundancy is nice.
Make sure, redundancy. You shouldn't
backups are
you shouldn't not have it, but it's not the end all be all of data retention.
And it can
still fail.
The nice thing about the redundancy is usually you get a smart error. Smart is a thing that tells you when your hard drive is behaving out of the normal.
Right.
A smart error which tells you should go to Amazon and buy a new hard drive right then.
Like smart errors mean that a drive failure may be imminent.
Exactly. So other things to think about before you step down this path is this isn't a cheap project.
No.
Even if you're using like an old gaming PC, which is I think what both of us did for the motherboard, CPU, and memory, the drives, you should plan to replace the drives, especially if you're running them 24/7 every 3 to 5 years at most. You'll probably run out of space depending on what you're using the drive for before that time. But you want to have a motherboard with a lot of SATA ports because you're not going to be using like M2 SSDs or anything like that right now. And you want to budget for replacing and probably upgrading the drives at least every, like I said, three-ish. I start getting nervous when the drives are 3 years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I waited for a sale and bought a fifth drive of the type that I already had, and it's in the closet just in case.
Well, so the nice thing about this is you can, like, if you know that you're going to move your 4 terabyte, 4 terabyte array to a 4 8 terabyte array drive, you can kind of keep an eye on sales and like you can ride that sweet spot where you're paying $100 per drive. But you just have to be aware of it.
Yeah. So ultimately, when I was pretty close to pulling the trigger on a Synology until, like I said, I started looking at like what the CPU was in there and how much they cost, and like you're kind of paying a lot for what you're getting horsepower wise.
What you're paying for with the Synology is drive cage and hot swappability and stuff like that, and also the fact that you don't have to futz with the OS at all.
Right. It's like an ease of use. It's a turnkey integrated thing. But I started looking at like, oh man, these enclosures are getting $300-$400. And then, like you said, I started looking at like what PC hardware I had in the closet doing nothing and thinking like, I could spend about the same, maybe a little bit, $150-$200 more and build like a whole PC with what I've already got here.
And then you don't have to transcode videos.
Yeah, and then you've got a modern, real, proper ass, like quad core Intel CPU in there and a lot of memory.
Yeah.
And a lot of headroom to do other stuff, which is what I ended up doing.
Okay, so I've gotten to the point, I've decided I think this is a good idea. This is something I need to do. What are the choices I have to make
in terms of
like what
software?
Yeah, like what hardware do I use? What software do I use? Let's start with software. But like, there's a bunch of software options that weren't there when I started doing this.
That's where things have gotten weird because like you've been deep in FreeNAS for a long time. Like Vinny from Giant Bomb is
he's another FreeNAS
friend of ours who was deep into that world. So like I was able to kind of draft off you guys and like kind of pick people's brains and stuff like that. But the point I'm making is like, it seems like when you guys got into it, that was kind of the only real well-supported option. And now there's a lot of stuff out there.
So at the time, like if you were really reasonably comfortable doing Linux stuff, you could build something that was comparable, but it probably wouldn't support ZFS.
Right.
And ZFS was a big part of the draw. Because one of the other benefits of ZFS is you can clone drives across pretty much any pipeline.
Yeah.
So like if you have 8 drives in the machine, you can make an exact copy of one array really easily. But also if you have enough slack space on your system or have 4 extra drives in your system, we can connect using cryptography and the internet.
Yeah.
And like I can back up my stuff to you and you can back up your stuff to me.
I think you can literally use like a pipe at the command line.
Yeah.
And pipe the entire contents of your storage volume through SSH over the internet to your house if you wanted to.
Well, or like
some crazy shit
I could bring my server over here and we can make a copy of my server on your server.
Yeah.
And it would take 3 days to copy over.
Yeah.
But like
it's wild. Like when you really start digging into how flexible, and again, this is stuff like to be clear, you really need to be not only comfortable with the idea of spending an entire Saturday tinkering with this stuff, but you need to feel like that might be a good time.
Yeah, like
if that's not you, then this is not something you really want to get into.
Well, so
like, it requires a tremendous amount of toil.
But in like sporadic chunks.
Totally. To do like really esoteric stuff like that, I mean.
Yeah. I went with FreeNAS. There's other options out there. I think if I were doing this today, I would probably just do a Ubuntu server.
Really? So that's the thing that I'm seeing a lot more people getting into these days.
Well,
because like Linux is just such a more actively developed community and platform, and ZFS support has gotten really good on Linux.
ZFS support is good on Linux. At the time when FreeNAS was relatively new, or when I got into FreeNAS, it wasn't relatively new. They had a plugin architecture so that like you didn't have to fool with I can't remember what the apt-get equivalent is on FreeBSD.
Package PKG.
You didn't have to fool with you didn't have to find a good package maintainer who was maintaining packages of Plex and what other software you wanted to install.
Yeah, I guess
you just mashed a button in the web UI and it worked.
We should step back a little bit and say basically like all the things you might want to do on a NAS that has the headroom to do stuff besides storage, ideally for the end user would exist in like a plugin kind of format,
or as a package, maybe,
or as something that is like as
something that
self-contained and easy to install and implement as possible.
Yeah, the challenge of installing stuff on BSD and Linux is that there's usually a boatload of dependencies.
Yes.
So like in order for Plex to work, it has to have H.264 codecs, it has to have transcode software, and it has all this other stuff.
Yeah. And all those libraries need to be installed in some fashion.
Yeah.
Like nothing works. Nothing just works.
Well, so at worst case, you want to use like the built-in package manager to do that.
Yeah.
Which works kind of like the App Store in a lot of ways. You just see all the other stuff that gets installed, whereas the App Store just does it for you.
Right.
Or even better, I don't actually use any FreeNAS plugins anymore. I do everything at the command line in Jails because the plugins were too limited.
Yeah. So that's the thing. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a benefit for like Synology users who don't have the extra horsepower to run stuff in containers. We gotta explain what container. So container is like a virtual machine that runs inside the OS and lets you run a whole other minimal version of FreeBSD inside a virtual machine that's somehow very lightweight. I don't know how that stuff works.
I think it uses like
Beehive
virtualization, hypervisor stuff. I'm not super clear on that stuff. But the thing I was going to say is it seems like the biggest knock against using FreeNAS right now is that it's moving away from this containerized model at exactly the time that the entire rest of the world is going like headfirst in that direction.
The jails, so FreeNAS and FreeBSD have a concept called jails, which basically lets you isolate processes that may be like security risks or whatever.
It's just a little sandbox version of the OS.
Yeah, exactly.
And like that's where I run everything. But like you said, it means you have to get in there. As things stand right now, you have to get in there at the command line, and if you're lucky, just download like a pre-compiled binary package of something.
Yeah.
If you're unlucky, you're going to end up on the GitHub repo of the thing you want to run and literally talking to the guy who develops it.
Yeah.
In the one case where I had to do that, he was extremely friendly and I helped him squash a couple bugs. And that was fun.
Nut server?
That was not for my nut server.
Okay.
It was for the little music server that I run.
Oh,
but on one level, it's super gratifying, because I actually went through the install script for the FreeBSD compilation process and had to tweak some stuff to make it work. And once I got it working, it was awesome.
But also,
on the other hand, you really want to spend your time doing stuff like that.
I was much more into spending my time doing stuff like that when I didn't have a 7-year-old that I could be playing with and hanging out with instead.
Yes.
Yeah. This is definitely a place where the software is free, but your time is not.
Yes,
so
100%.
Be aware of that.
Yeah.
At this point, I'm probably on FreeNAS until the next time I upgrade hard drives, just because it's enough of a pain in the ass to migrate 12 terabytes of data or whatever I have on my array right now that I'm not going to do it. I'm not confident enough in my web backup, my internet-based backup, that I would just say, fuck it, I'm going to format these drives and reinstall and install from scratch Ubuntu.
Right.
There's other options now too, which are a lot of people are running hypervisors. We talked about this a little bit before the show, but a hypervisor is just a virtual machine manager that lives just above the BIOS level of your computer. And then you can run Ubuntu and FreeNAS and whatever other nonsense you want to run all in the same machine. And it does a lot of the stuff that jails do, in FreeBSD, FreeNAS, off the shelf.
So on like the extreme other end of the spectrum from the jails and FreeBSD are like, you hear the term Docker a lot.
Yeah.
Like that's the containerized stuff that I was talking about before. Like the model that people are moving to now is stuff like Docker. You just download a container that has everything set up inside of it already for you. Basically, like that is a true plugin, really.
It's like it's a virtual machine. Docker is kind of like how EC2. It's similar to like old school virtual machines, but you can do individual applications in them. Is the key.
Yeah. But like the upshot is that a lot of the work is done for you.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to compile anything. You generally don't have to configure much. Like it's kind of ready to go out of the box.
If somebody is maintaining a Docker container for something that you want and they didn't make weird choices, which sometimes happens because it's all open source, then Docker containers are a really good way to do a lot of that stuff. Yeah. And Ubuntu supports Docker containers much better than FreeNAS does now.
Like they're actually deprecating Docker support entirely.
Well, but Beehive is the same concept.
Similar stuff, yeah. But the support is just not great there. Like the Linux world, that stuff is a lot better supported. Like I almost feel like there is like a real opportunity for a Linux-based competitor to FreeNAS to come in and maybe do that stuff better.
I'm surprised that there isn't some front end for home server.
Like there are, like there's stuff like Unraid, which is a paid closed source Linux based.
No thanks.
But they use different file systems. Like I don't think the robust storage support is there. There's Open Media Vault, which is a Debian based NAS kind of front end. I don't think there's anything on the level of FreeNAS out there right now in terms of feature set.
But that might not be a bad thing given like the scope of FreeNAS is problematic sometimes. It's so big.
I guess so. I mean, it does a lot for you. Like it's a web-based front end. Like you administrate it through a web browser.
That's true.
And it's relatively simple to like set up your storage volumes, and it'll automate like periodic file system checks to make sure everything's cool.
But you also have to do a lot of reading before you set up that machine the first time.
Yes,
because you can make some choices that will really haunt you.
Yes,
as I did for the first until the first time I upgraded my hard drives in the FreeNAS box.
Yeah.
And then the other option is just to keep running Windows on the Windows machine.
Totally.
Because you can run the Plex server on top of that.
I meant to, when we were talking about like Synologies and the kind of easier entry level stuff at the top of this, I meant to mention that like, I don't know, 80% of the stuff you can do with some elaborate open source setup like a FreeNAS box, you can just do with a Windows machine with drives plugged into it.
Pretty, like you can run VirtualBox and run or put a Docker container. I think you can put Docker containers on Windows. I'm not sure about that.
I think so. But I mean, just in terms of like, storage spaces in Windows will let you do basic RAID. I don't think it's as robust it's definitely not as robust as what you're going to get with CFS, but like,
but if
you can RAID drives in Windows, you can run a Plex server on Windows. You can do a lot of that basic stuff.
Exactly.
Like you're probably not going to use cups to provide AirPrint support for your 10-year-old laser printer.
Wait, does cups support?
It took a lot of work. I had to find a Python script and some homebrew driver somebody wrote.
Oh man, but I already have a web interface for mine. I can show it to you later. That's going to be fun.
I'm running all kinds of cool shit on my FreeNAS machine, but it took so much work to get a lot of it up and running that like I can't recommend it unless it really sounds like it would be fun to you.
It's like tinkering with an old car.
Totally.
Not something you do.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so the other thing to think about is how much is power consumption.
Yeah.
Like if you have an old desktop PC that's running a NAS for you versus taking a small embedded processor in a Synology or something like that, you're going to use a lot more electricity.
Yes. Like a Synology is going to be very low cost in terms of your electric bill.
I mean, the hard drives still have to spin, but which is a lot of the energy,
right? But you don't have a gaming oriented CPU sitting there.
Yeah, well, and also, at least in the old days, a lot of the older BSD kernels were really bad about power management because they were designed for servers.
They actually still are.
Yeah. So
really, I don't know in the weeds you want to get on this stuff.
Well, so the CPU is basically running 100% all the time.
Yeah. Like I'm running, basically what I ended up doing was like, you could run a FreeNAS machine on like easily like a Core i3 or even like, they still sell Pentiums, right?
Pentium is it's like down.
It's like a sub i3.
Yeah,
like
it's between Atom and Core.
Like you could, from what I've read, you could run a FreeNAS machine on a Pentium just fine. But I had an old motherboard, but not an old CPU.
Okay.
And I was going to have to buy a CPU to put in that board. And when I started looking at the price difference between an i3 and an i7, it was like $50.
Yeah, and you bought the i7.
No, well, so yeah, what I did was like, wait, I could buy a better CPU for my gaming machine and put this old CPU from the gaming machine in the NAS.
Oh, perfect.
So that's how I ended
Everybody
up with
wins.
So that's how I ended up with 6700K in my NAS.
Oh,
but
okay.
The reason I brought this up is that what you said about the power consumption is definitely true, because I found after I got that thing up and running that even right now, FreeNAS out of the box will not put that CPU into a low power state when it's idle.
No.
So I looked at the power consumption and it was sitting there running at 4 gigahertz 24/7.
Yeah.
For no reason.
Did you figure out how to fix that?
Yeah.
Oh, I need to talk to you about that.
Yes, I can show you.
I did it on the last machine that I built, and on the new one, I haven't figured out how to do it again.
You can set the C state of the CPU. C states are power levels, basically like frequency and voltage
on a boot up or something. Yeah,
yeah. You set it as a tunable in the FreeNAS interface.
Oh, interesting.
You need to set it to C3, I think.
I mean, I looked at my power consumption for my FreeNAS server. It's like $20 a month.
Yeah, it's not. I think it added somewhere around $10 a month.
Yeah, well,
for me,
because of the way the tiers work, where we are, it pushed us into the next higher tier, so we started paying penalty rates.
Like it kind of sucks.
Yeah,
but at the same time, like I said, I've got that print server running on there. I've got I'm running Homebridge, which I know we've talked about before, which gives you Apple Home support on home automation devices that don't natively have it.
Yeah,
stuff like that. I'm running a bunch of little services in the background that do little stuff around the house.
It's very useful.
So it is useful to leave that thing on all the time, even if it does kind of cost.
Yeah. $240 a year versus
don't say that.
Buying a new $100 printer. But you didn't send a printer to a landfill, Brad. That's the important thing.
I made use of something I had.
Exactly. Reduce, reuse, recycle.
Which is always the goal.
Okay, so I mean, we can talk about what we've run a little bit. You've done it. I'm running an X99 board with whatever my last, I think a 6850K, which is a hexacore.
Okay.
Old hexacore.
I'm actually using an Asus gaming. I had a motherboard in the closet that I'd never used that I got as part of a bundle.
Oh yeah.
But I didn't necessarily want that board, but that's what I ended up with. So I had bought a different board.
So the one thing that's really nice that I wish that the board that I'm using now had that it doesn't is the serial port over network support. Okay. So you can basically get the serial console, which gives you
console into
it without having to go into the other room.
Yes.
Because like right now it's up on a shelf in my garage, and in order for me to get it down when I need to fix something that breaks, which happens like realistically maybe once a year, I have to turn it off.
Oh, that sucks.
I have to unplug it. I have to carry it down into the living room. I have to plug it into a monitor and keyboard, put a video card in.
Wait, you can't just SSH into it?
It depends on how broken it is.
Oh, that's very broken.
Yeah, if it's broken enough that it's not booting into it's stuck at the boot menu.
I see.
Then I have to unplug it and plug it into a monitor and keyboard. But I mean, all the other side of that is that the motherboards that support that console over network standard are like server motherboards. Yeah. So you're gonna have to buy a separate motherboard, which may or may not be something you want.
IPMI, I think is the name for that.
IPEI.
Vinny has one of those.
Oh, really?
Yeah, his board has that.
Of course he does. Jealous. Storage. Let's see. One of the questions we got was about which drives to buy.
Yeah.
Because there's like Western Digital, the manufacturers are making drives that are labeled NAS drives now.
Yeah. Western Digital codes theirs by color. It's like
reds, I think.
Yeah. So like I think greens are the cheap or the budget drives. Blacks are sort of like your gaming performance drive.
Nobody should buy black drives anymore. No, because you have an SSD for that.
Oh, sure. Yes. And reds are the quote unquote NAS drives.
Yeah. So the difference is that they're rated for different MBTFs because the NAS drives are assumed to be always on.
Is that mean time between failure?
Mean time between failure.
Yeah.
And the way I buy drives isn't by looking at what type they buy. Backblaze, which is one of the online backup companies, does a few times a year a really good roundup of here are the drives that we've bought over the last year, and they're buying tens of thousands of drives a month. Here's what's failed at what rates.
Yeah. They've got really detailed statistics on their failure rates. That's how I ended up buying my drives too.
And I go and look at specific model numbers there and buy the drives there's always stuff on the edge that looks good that they've only bought like 500 drives.
Yeah.
You want to get into the fat part where it's like we bought 10,000 of these
something that
and like 0.1% have failed after 3 years.
Something that they have like healthy 5 figures of in their network. One thing that's worth pointing out, so like when I was looking at drives, I almost bought some 7200 RPM drives.
Yeah, don't.
Which is, totally not worth it because like not only do they put out more heat and use more energy, and I'm guessing maybe don't last as long. I could be wrong on that.
More heat, more energy usually means that they don't last as long.
I can't say for sure that they fail faster than a 5400 RPM.
But it's not necessary.
But the big thing to know is that your storage is going to be constrained by your network speed.
Yeah.
Like you're not, some stuff you do on the machine itself is obviously going to be accessing the drives.
Maybe it's
gigabit network tops out at like a little over 100,
950 megabits per second.
Yeah, so it's a little over 100 megabytes a second.
Yeah. The I don't think spinning platters will get over 100 megabytes a second, probably.
Maybe
I can't remember.
I don't know.
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
But the point is, you're going to put a cache. I would recommend putting a cache. So there's 3 types of storage that are going to be in your FreeNAS box. You're going to have something that you boot off of that the OS is installed onto. And in the old days, they recommended you use a USB thumb drive for that.
They kind of still do, but that can be spotty because those USB thumb drives are such shitty products that they fail a lot.
Yeah. So you can buy like 128 gigabyte SSD for like $20 now.
Yeah.
That's what you're going to install your OS to because it's reliable and good.
Yeah. That's a good thing to put your
you're going to have
FreeNAS install
a cache drive potentially.
So
this is optional.
Is maybe less true than it used to be.
Oh, really?
But yeah.
Oh, well, I just put an old 128. I have 220
listen, old man,
SSDs.
It's been a while since you've been in the game.
Back in my day, I had to have a cache drive.
My understanding is that that's relevant to some workloads, especially in like workplace type
heavy reads and writes.
Yeah, okay. I think it's only really relevant to like heavy sequential reads.
Oh, good to know.
So.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll investigate further.
The FreeNAS people, and this is for FreeNAS only. I can't speak to other stuff, but they have a lot of recommendations out there now. Like they straight up have like a blog post that you can Google pretty easily.
Oh, that's like here's a media server.
Well, no, it's like, hey, what hardware should I buy?
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, here's how much memory you actually realistically need for how much storage you want. Should you put in a cache drive like you mentioned? Like maybe probably not, depending on what you're doing with it. Like they have good guidelines out there now for if you really want to build a machine like this.
Yeah, they didn't have that when I did it last time.
I think the blog post is like 3 years old or something.
Okay, so maybe it may not a cache drive, but definitely installing on the SSD. I was losing USB thumb drives at a rate of like 1 a year.
Yeah,
for a while there.
I had 2 die in the last 6 months.
Even buying expensive, like I was buying nice, like brand name.
Totally, yeah. I'm buying
drives.
like the nicest, like the. It's funny. I started to say I was buying like the most expensive like Samsung flash drives I could get.
Yeah,
and by that I mean they're like $12 a piece because that's like literally for a 32 gig flash drive. That's like the most you can spend on one.
Yeah,
and I was like, surely these will last because it's the nicest. Nope. But yeah, like I had one fail or start failing, like throwing errors and put off. I was like, the other one's fine. I can let it go. I put it off for like 3 months, and then the other one started failing, and then the whole machine went down.
Yeah, no, it's not great.
Recovering it was terrifying.
So yeah, I like Backblaze. I've had really good luck using the Backblaze method to figure out what drives to buy.
Yeah, but so I mean, do you feel like NAS drives are generally worth it?
I think
like they tend to have better warranties.
So they have better warranties. They're usually 3-year warranties rather than 1-year warranties.
So you might get a failure in that 3 years.
I have had warranty replaced NAS drives. The other thing is, at least the time I had the NAS drive fail, they did a cross ship for me, which was nice.
Okay.
So they shipped me the new drive. I had to give them a credit card, obviously, but they shipped me the new drive, and that never happened when I had a consumer drive fail.
Right. Yeah, and they are supposedly made to be a little more resilient and more
slightly better lube on the bearings.
Maybe, yeah. I don't know, but like they're made to run 24/7 for longer periods of time.
I'm always terrified turning off a drive. I mean, my guess is that probably they do use a different lubrication on the bearings because they're designed to be on all the time.
Yeah.
Because the scary thing, when I was starting out in IT, my boss told me, oh yeah, on this server, if you turn it off for more than an hour or two, you got to whack the hard drive with a hammer when it spins back up, which basically just jars the lubricant in the bearings enough that they were able to get over the rotational friction from the, Anyway, it was scary. I don't like that. I'm always scared turning it off. I just like to leave it on all the time.
Yeah, that's probably safe. I mean, another issue you run into in this category is, should you pay for the ones that are actually labeled NAS, or should you do like a lot of people do now and shuck drives out of the Western Digital enclosures because supposedly those are the same thing?
I'm always scared to shuck drives.
Same here.
And also sometimes they have non-standard interfaces on the shucked drives.
Like occasionally you'll have to like put a piece of tape over one of the pins or something to get it to spin up.
When you say shuck a drive, you mean take an external enclosure that they sell at Best Buy for cheap and put.
Yes.
Yeah.
For a long period of time, at least the internet scuttlebutt was, I don't know how well this was ever actually confirmed, but supposedly the white label drives in those enclosures, and by white label I mean like unmarked, like OEM labeled drives, were supposedly reds.
That would make sense.
So you were getting the nice high-end NAS drive for like a 2/3 of the price or something like that. But like that's never really been confirmed. And I'm like you. Like, I'm not brave enough. I would rather just I would rather pay the premium. And
it's cheaper to pay the extra $10 because it's not like the thing is it's not that much of a premium.
Yeah. Again, when I'm putting like old family home movies and stuff on this thing, like data that is like personally important to me.
I'm looking.
Like I'm willing to pay a little bit extra.
So like a blue 1 terabyte drive is $45 right now. A red, well,
I don't know if they even make 1 terabyte reds anymore.
Red 1 terabytes. So a 12 terabyte, Jesus, I got to get new drives. A 12 terabyte red drive is $363 on Amazon right now.
Mine are 6. I think they were like $180 each.
I think my guess is 8 is probably the sweet spot right now.
Yeah.
So red,
they go on sale a lot. There was the 10 gig reds were like $130 for a little while there.
So red 8 is getting expensive. So the other thing is sometimes things get expensive because demand for a specific size goes up because somebody who's a data center buys 4,000 of the same drive from Amazon. So 10 terabyte reds are not available right now. That's weird.
Like I said, they were on sale a while back. They
were on a hella sale if they were $150 because they're $250.
Or maybe it was $180 or something like that, but they were on a deep sale.
Anyway, the point is you don't want to buy the biggest drive, even though that's going to be your initial. You want to buy middle of the pack because that's where your you look at price per terabyte or price per gigabyte, not overall price for your drives.
Yeah.
Let's see what an 8 terabyte blue drive costs just for comparison. And blues are 7,200 RPM, I think, usually. Maybe not. So 6 terabyte single drive blue is $137. So it is a pretty good premium there. Anyway, we talked about add-ons, the other stuff you can run. Like if you're buying, that matters much more if you're buying an embedded NAS, like something like a Synology or something like that, where I think Synology you can get to a command line, you can run more of what you want on it. But if you're buying something that doesn't run an x86 CPU, especially, you're going to be limited in what you can run based on what their package is for.
Yes.
So look at that stuff in advance.
Yeah.
And that's kind of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I like Plex. I like. I used to run Subsonic until Spotify added Beatles and Led Zeppelin a few years ago.
You don't need that.
And then
anymore.
I was like, I'm probably fine now.
Like I said, I'm running that little home music server to stream my.
That's what Subsonic does, basically. Yeah.
I'm running we could sit here all day and talk about the stuff. I'm running the controller for my Wi-Fi access point.
I think you're running much better stuff than I am.
On the NAS.
What's the controller for your Wi-Fi access point?
It's the UniFi controller. It's Ubiquiti stuff.
Oh, okay.
The interface, the management interface for the Wi-Fi access point does not run on the access point.
Of course not.
You have to run it on an external machine.
This is why people shouldn't. Anyway, okay.
So I set it up on there. You could run it in Windows if you wanted
to. You're running your power, your NUTS server.
We never even talked about my NUTS server.
I know.
I bought a UPS.
You've been wanting to talk about your NUTS server for ages.
I bought a UPS that has been sitting in the box under my desk for the last 6 weeks.
So uninterruptible power supply.
Finally spent the last few days setting it up.
Okay. How does it work?
So modern UPSs have USB ports on them.
Yes.
And they can report out a ton of like diagnostic info over that port. There's an open source package called Network UPS Tools, or NUT.
I'm shaking my head.
That it's pretty flexible. It can do a lot of stuff, but I ended up installing it on a Raspberry Pi and plugging that into the UPS.
Okay.
And then
why not just run it on the FreeNAS
because
server?
I wanted it running on a separate. So we could sit here all day and digress about this stuff. FreeNAS is an appliance. That's how the developer looks at it.
Okay.
Like they don't want you in there monkeying with stuff more than you really should be.
Or if you do, they want you to stay in jails.
You should do it all in jails. Yeah. Like running like system level services in FreeNAS that are outside the scope of FreeNAS is not the best idea.
This is a really important point because I did this at the beginning and I really messed myself up.
Yes, you should not be installing external software directly on the base FreeNAS system at all.
The reason you don't want to do that is when FreeNAS upgrades, it will wipe away everything you do that's in the base OS.
And you can end up like overwriting things they've customized and screw stuff up. Like it's a bad idea.
Yeah, but the jails give you the flexibility.
Yes.
Like there's no downside to using jails.
Like I very well probably could have run NUT in
a jail,
I guess. Although in this use case, the base FreeNAS system is also a NUT client.
You could do that.
Probably could. But I wanted something low power to run the thing that manages the UPS on in case the power goes out, so it doesn't drain the battery fast.
Yeah. Well, and you want to be able to run that after the FreeNAS machine is off.
That's really that's actually what I'm getting at. So Raspberry Pi uses like what, 1.5 watts or something.
Yeah, it's like a phone.
So I'm using that as the NUT server, and plus, what is a Raspbian installation in terms of like sentimental value? Like you can just hose that thing and start over.
It takes like 10 minutes.
In 10 minutes, if you feel like you screwed something up. So point being, I've got that thing monitoring the NAS. I mean the UPS.
Okay.
So it keeps track of like what the charge level is. Is it on wall power or battery, et cetera, et cetera. You can set up conditions on it. So I have it set up so that when it either hits 50% battery or 15 minutes left of runtime, whichever comes first.
Okay.
I'm running the NUT client service on the FreeNAS machine and my Windows machine. So if those machines are on, the Raspberry Pi will tell them to shut down.
Wow.
They shut down.
Wait, are those machines plugged into the UPS too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So if I happen to go out, if I happen to leave the house with both those machines on and the power goes out and the battery gets down to half, then the Raspberry Pi tells those machines to shut down.
Does it turn off your monitors too?
They're
so small, they're not, they hardly take any electricity.
Very funny. They're not plugged into the UPS.
Okay, that's probably best.
Anyway, like whatever. I won't sit here and ramble about it, but like my router also runs Linux, so I figured I should try to get that gracefully shut down in case of power outage.
Sure.
So I spent some time figuring out how to get the NUT server to also tell the router to shut down because running NUT on the router was not an option.
This is a deep level of nerdery I wasn't expecting to have today.
I figured out that I could have the Pi SSH a shutdown command through the router, but I needed it to work without me being there to type a password in, so I generated a private key pair.
Wow.
So that the NUT could tell the router what to do without authenticating.
So I think the weirdest thing that I run on my Plex, on my server, I run HomeKit, which if you do any home automation stuff is really handy. Homebridge, yeah.
Yeah, I've got that too.
I used to run my DVD ripping software in a virtual machine.
Huh.
It stopped working when they took away PHP, the VirtualBox client for FreeNAS a few versions ago. But I rebuilt it in Docker, and that worked okay for a while. And now I just do it on the desktop because my desktop machine's way faster.
Yeah.
But I run a tool that organizes media in my folders. So I just when I rip something, I dump it in a folder, and it looks at the file name, which is usually like Blues Brothers 19. It's the movie name and the year that it came out, and it goes and hits the FreeDDB databases for movies, the movie database and all that stuff, and TV stuff if it's a TV show, and it puts it in, because Plex now is recommending that you put movies in a folder.
Plex is weirdly insistent that you name all your files and directories in a certain way.
Well, and if you want to do like extra features, because I've started ripping extra features on all old DVDs, you got to put everything in subfolders.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that sounds like a huge pain.
So it does it all automatically for me. And it's just some script I found that some dude wrote. And
those are always the best. It's just some script or some tiny program that somebody wrote.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is the cool thing about this, is that like somebody will have had a problem and they'll solve it by going and writing this big long bash script or something, and then they just chuck it up on GitHub with some documentation.
Like that. I mean, again, not to ramble about this forever, but that might be the most gratifying interaction I've had with a human being on the internet in years, was trying to help the author of this little music server debug a couple of problems.
He didn't call you a noob or anything?
Oh, he was super.
That's really nice.
He went and forked the repo with a custom debug level logging change specifically for me.
That's awesome.
He said, hey, clone into this branch and compile that and run it and then send me the log. It's kind of amazing.
There's something really fun about running a machine that you can do almost everything from the command line on.
Totally.
The
best part is, like, when he did that, I didn't actually go through the Git process of cloning that repo. I just went and looked at the branch. I went and looked at the change he made, and then I went into the source that was already on my machine and changed it myself. I just recompiled it. Like, it's so fun messing with that stuff.
So there's some stuff that I learned along the way. And I think there's stuff you learned along the way. And they also are doing much better about giving guidelines to people who are like building home servers now. Because when I started, it was pretty much like, oh, you wanted to use this for home? You're crazy.
Right.
The big one is memory requirements. Actually, the very biggest one that I found is that it's really important when you set up a machine to document all the stuff you install on it, so that if it ever fails and you have to rebuild it, or you want to, like, if something bad happens, it's much better to find out that you forgot to reinstall HomeKit by looking at the list of things you have installed.
Right.
Like, I just have a Google Doc that is basically, here's all of the stuff that's installed. Here's whether it lives in a jail with something else. Here's whether it lives in a jail on its own.
Yes.
And here's like here's the command line flag that I tripped to set the CPU power state, because
you don't want to have to remember, because you will forget about all this stuff. Like right now I'm like super hot on all this UPS stuff I spent all this time setting up, but 6 months from now I will have forgotten 90% of what I did.
Yeah, and like
I'm going to make an image of the SD card in that Raspberry Pi just in case that thing dies and I need to restore it without doing all that work.
Well, and you want to save not just like the information, the settings, but you want to save the source.
Yeah.
So you can go back and figure out like how you backed into getting this Debian port of something to run on a FreeNAS jail, right?
I've got an entire folder of links to web tutorials on stuff like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a deep ass rabbit hole. And make sure that this is really something you want to spend your time on.
And I've even on some of them, especially if it's on message boards, I've copied the actual information and pasted it in.
Yeah, because
oftentimes those links will change.
Yeah, you're worried that stuff will go away at some point.
So when I was starting this out, they told you to do 1 terabyte of storage of RAM for every 1 gigabyte of RAM for every terabyte of storage in your ZFS, which I think is not.
That has been the common perception, but that's not, according to that blog post from the FreeNAS people. Like I said,
it's not necessary anymore.
They said I think they said up to about 100 terabytes of storage, you're good with, I want to say 24 gig of memory, or maybe even 16.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. I've got 16 and it's totally fine.
So I had some RAM fail last year and went down to, I think, 8 for a while. That was definitely not enough.
Yes.
It was constantly paging with a 16 terabyte array.
ZFS started as a server file system. So like portability and like efficiency, I don't think were primary design goals.
No. ECC RAM, they used to always recommend that you use ECC RAM. ECC RAM has built-in error correction, and it's a little bit slower and a lot more expensive. Usually requires a special motherboard.
Yeah, and processor.
Oh, right.
And Intel is shitty about that stuff.
Sometimes. Depends on how old the processor is.
Last I checked, this was 2 years ago, but i3s could use ECC memory and i7s could not.
Of course.
Because they want you to buy a Xeon. If you want the horsepower of an i7, they want you to pay for a Xeon. So it's thorny.
But the upshot is the reason you need ECC is in case a cosmic ray hits the RAM while something that's about to be written in ZFS is in memory.
Yeah.
You're probably okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same as every other file system.
Yeah.
Like it's not.
You're not increasing your chances.
There is some weird urban legend that ZFS is prone to data corruption, which is the opposite of true.
Yeah.
But if you have mission critical data, then
if you're building a server for work for this, buy ECC.
Absolutely want ECC.
Yeah, if you're doing it to save your movies at home and like it only matters during writes. Also, that's the other thing. It's not going to you're not going to lose something during a read. And for most home uses, writes are infrequent and reads are more frequent.
This whole thing about ECC memory turned into like an old school internet flame war. From what I saw,
I'm sure we're going to get comments
to the point that there's kind of an infamous forum thread where one of the authors of ZFS stepped into this thread and basically said, no.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about this.
It's not actually like that. It's no more prone to this than any other file system.
Yeah. I think that's it.
Yeah.
I think those are the big ones for me.
I feel bad. This was a really rambly episode of this thing. It's a big topic.
There's a lot. And it's I mean, kind of running one of these servers is a big rambly topic.
Yes, it really is.
Because often,
I can feel my beard growing longer and turning grayer as we talk about this.
Well, it's one of those things that like you'll have a problem you want to solve, and you troll down a bunch of message board threads. It's really important when you're searching for information on this to look for the version number, specifically the version you're running, like the whole string. It's like 10.7.639-U3.
Yeah.
And that'll help cut down a lot of the noise.
Like I ran into a problem with my Wi-Fi controller last week because they don't support the current version of MongoDB. They only support the previous version, but
this is why I want to switch to Ubuntu.
But the package had gotten updated to the newer version, and so it broke part of the controller.
So yeah, it's other thing I learned the hard way. If you don't upgrade without making sure you read the release notes really thoroughly to make sure you're not doing something that's going to break the upgrade.
Yes.
If you do upgrade, you can always roll back to the last version really easily because it's all just stored in ZFS.
I have fully become the guy who doesn't want to update anything that's working at this point.
No. Yeah. If it's working and it's still supported, still getting security patches, never update.
Like the thrill of updating firmware and seeing the version number go up, like you have to 100% let go of that.
Yeah.
Because it will screw you more often than not for no benefit.
Assume you're going to spend at least an afternoon fixing shit after you do a big upgrade.
Like when you get stuff working, just lock it in and let it go. Just learn to appreciate uptime rather than version numbers increasing.
That's the cool number.
Yeah.
But I think that's the high point.
Yeah,
if you have
like
more
this started out as a NAS episode, but I feel like it kind of turned into a general like Unix running open source software kind of episode, which is really where this whole thing leads, I think.
I used to have a friend who ran a magazine called, I still have a friend, but he used to run a magazine called Maximum Linux when I was at Maximum PC. And he said, one of the first things he said that got him in trouble with the Linux community was that Linux is only free if you value your time at nothing.
Sure.
And it's very true in this case.
Did you know that Linux is not a Unix?
Yeah.
FreeBSD is a Unix.
FreeBSD is a
Mac
Unix.
Mac OS is a Unix.
Well, Mac OS is FreeBSD.
Well, no, but I mean, like shell. Unix has a definition that you have
Linux
to
is
meet.
POSIX compliant, but not
Unix. You have to meet specific requirements to be considered a Unix.
Yeah.
So Mac OS is, and Linux is not.
Linus wanted nothing to do with that nonsense.
I guess not.
Yeah. That's going to do it for us this week. If you like the podcast, tell your friends.
Yeah.
Use the social medias.
Yeah.
Post the good word. Yeah. Spread it. If you have questions about NAS stuff that we didn't get into here.
Yeah, this was so scattershot. I'm sure if there's any clarification.
Yeah, fire them off.
That you'd be interested in.
If you'd like to yell at us about ECC RAM, you can send your comments to not us at techpod@content.town.
Those other guys with that other tech pod.
Yeah, somebody else. I don't know. Send it to the Bombcast or something. I don't want to hear about it. But we'll be back next week with more TechPod. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see y'all next time.